You've got to be macho. Well, at least that's what I was told growing up. Vulnerability was a disease that only the weak could have, and I knew I wasn't going to be a weakling, so onto the manliness I'd grab. A piece of my 6-year-old self to hold on to. Ego was nothing short of a flesh wound that haunted my very existence. I encountered a much older cousin and she touched me in areas I never knew would grow. It felt so violating and painful. She told me not to tell, and every holiday we fell into a spiral of incestual behaviors. He was sexual, let me save face later. I must be smart enough to know that sharp weapons kill easy and blunt ones painfully slow. So let me be blunt. I suppose the peep shows and motions that drove my purity away were more significant than the smile she'd show my mother when she'd ask why I was crying in pain, and she'd laugh saying, "Your son isn't man enough to pass here and confess that he's been a little bad boy." Oh wow, what a lollygag. As I grew, I would choke on the fear of telling my mother what was happening, but I think she knew. Next thing was my cousin leaving the room to go out and coming back to find her bags fully packed, and awaiting her was my uncle, who's her dad. They'd have a closed-door discussion. I swear I could hear cussing, and as my heart was pumping and blood rushing, my cousin and her dad would step out and she'd look at me like, "Ooh, and I catch you? I will definitely leave you with concussions," and they'd walk out the door, never for me to see them again, even unto this day. My mother would walk with me, bloodshot in the eyes from tears she failed to hold back, and hold me and say, "My son, let us pray." She said a prayer for me that spoke of forgiveness, but in the confusion I was in, it meant nothing. I know God was working, and I just didn't want to work with him, and so I grew. I grew up never getting to see her again. She no longer shared a relation with me. He defiled, I mean. She defiled, I mean. Pedophile, I mean. I lost my purity and identity. How could I have been robbed of my insides and left bare, naked, and empty? Having these thoughts running at the back of my mind, doing marathons with my morality. With time, I got to realize that sensitivity grew more to the touches felt in certain places. Was that a mistake? I'd ask as we exchanged awkward faces, our hearts racing as we intertwine our breaths to connect, slithering tongues that cause follicles to stand at the back of our necks, cracking in a turn of the head as she realizes tears flowing from her eyes, but you stay quiet
and not scream rape.
Instead,
such an act leaves us both craving, and so the rampage continues from here. To steal innocence becomes a living, and kidnapping dignity a motivating career.
The grave is the end for all. Why not be here earlier as we await the gates of hell to swallow us whole, as you've allowed us to?
For you neglected your own cries for help,
and we ignored yours too.